I'm Dr. Jordin Wiggins, and this is the Pleasure Principles podcast. Join me on this journey where sex, science, and sensuality meet. Let's change the conversation around sex and pleasure together.
I'm so excited to introduce you to the next guest on the I'll Have What She's Having series. Eleanor Beaton is the founder and CEO of SafiMedia, an education and coaching company for women entrepreneurs. Eleanor has been recognized nationally and globally for her work as a women's leadership expert, business coach, and writer. She is the former chair of the Visiting Women's Executive Exchange Program and a finalist for the prestigious National Business Book Award honor. She has won multiple national and international awards for journalism, leadership, coaching, and entrepreneurship. She has served as growth and marketing advisor to billion-dollar women CEOs, political leaders, and thousands of emerging women leaders and entrepreneurs. She is an advisor to venture capital funds, governments, universities, on entrepreneurship, economic development, and community strategy. I'm going to add in that Eleanor helped me come up with the title for my book, The Pink Canary. We'll get into how we know each other in the episode. This conversation was not scripted at all. It was like catching up with an old friend. And one of the things I want to highlight is we got deeper into talking about space, giving yourself your time back, being able to slow down for you, still have the outcome and impact that you want, but doing it for you and not slowing down because we are so exhausted. We are ready to drop. We're burnt out. We need to. Not slowing down as a reward because we work so hard, but slowing down just because. Creating space is one of the skills that I teach in the feminine mentorship, and boy, do superwomen struggle with that module. It's been great to watch Eleanor's life transform since we work together, and she shares really openly and authentically about what that process has been like. I cannot wait to share this conversation with you. Eleanor, I am so happy to have you here. I have told this story so many times that I wouldn't, in my ride or dies are going to know that they've heard this story so many times, they're probably going to roll their eyes, but I wouldn't have the Pink Canary without you. You were my first coach, I guess.
Yeah.
How many years ago?
So I think we started working together in 2018, maybe?
Yeah.
2017.
I can't even.
Yeah, something like that.
COVID has just made it a complete blur for me.
I know. I mean, we look as wonderful as ever.
I think so. Or better.
Fascinating. Probably better. Exactly.
Better because we've evolved in our businesses,
so
the way we do things. So we're going to talk about that today. But give me an update on you, on your business. Love to know what's going on.
Yeah. So I have a company called SafiMedia, and we really have a vision of advancing a model of economic growth that nourishes the planet, one woman-owned business at a time. That's the vision, right? And
can we just pause and let it sink in? Can you say it again, actually, because it just felt so good.
We have a vision of advancing a model of economic growth that nourishes the planet, one woman-owned business at a time.
Love it. That's a desire. You can feel it. It gives me goosebumps.
Right.
So tell us more about that.
Oh my gosh. Well, I've had this desire. It's interesting, and we'll talk about this, but I think, earlier in your career, there was for me, and I think there is for other people as well, this desire to prove yourself, just this desire to prove. And as you continue to grow, you start to see it's not about proving yourself. You do not need to be perfect. Truly, you don't need to be perfect. Your growth and what you have to contribute is totally connected to who you are. So it becomes about, uncovering and showing more and more of who you are. And so much of who we really are, I think, is anchored in parts of our childhood. And I can completely remember being in grade six, I am in a runoff against my friend Karen to become class president. And each of us have we co-organized this bazaar for the school, and we raised this money, and whoever was voted president would get to decide where that money was going. And she wanted to contribute it to some kids' charity. And in my, as only a grade six could, I was like, that's the dumbest idea ever. Because where we really need, this is my way of arguing, because what we really need to do is to save not just a few children, to save all the children by buying 1 acre of rainforest from the International Wildlife Fund. So, right. I just remember that was the year I, on Earth Day, I planted 500 trees around my parents' property with my parents in Canada, one of the most heavily forested countries in the world. But anyway, so this desire,
we still need trees.
We still need trees. So this kind of, as I've continued to evolve as a person, more of these deep-seated, aspirations, inspirations, desires continue to find their way into my work. The less I have to prove, the more I can just allow these things to come through. And I'm still a businesswoman, meaning, okay, Eleanor, so you have that vision. But how can you, at the end of your life, in your obituary, what would need to happen that you would feel that they weren't just words, that you'd actually created something, to make that so? And so I saw this picture of me and a group, this collective of women at the UN, and we represented hundreds of thousands of other women who were building really lucrative, profitable businesses that had small carbon footprints, that were, really advancing a model of growth, doing business differently. And in order to really show that, I was like, these are all businesses that have scaled past 1 million. So the mission became to double the number of women founders who sustainably scale past 1 million in annual revenue by 2030. And so that's kind of the mission.
So what I love about that, and just to bring it into my world for a second, there was a desire there, an aliveness there, you at the UN. And even if you peel it back, it was since you were in grade six, or maybe even before, right? Something inside you. So we need the desire, and then we also need to take the action, make it tangible. And that's exactly what you're doing. So how's it going?
Yeah, right. You know what? It's going, and I think the desire and the action really, for me has been all about allowing myself to get into situations or to be in a state where I can just see deeply. And by deeply, I mean seeing, in exquisite detail, the far away vision, seeing in exquisite detail who that woman is, who that future self is, and how I bring more of her into who I am every day. That's a huge part of it. And then really doing the next right thing. So the next right thing, right now is all about, initially it was about, okay, I need to work with the women entrepreneurs. And I've been doing that for years, working with the women entrepreneurs, women like you, women, these extraordinary leaders who are here to have a big impact. So I still do that. And, what we do, in our coaching programs is really all around supporting these women to build a jewel business. And a jewel business is a company that grows. So it grows its top line 30% per year until such time as the founder wants to accelerate that growth or decelerate. So it's not like, hey, we're going to 10x, although I used to be that way, but it's more what does sustainable growth look like? Because in Silicon Valley, they have unicorns. So they have all these companies going for this vision to be a unicorn with $1 billion valuation. We know so few of them will. But for women founders, like very few of the women founders in my circle want to be a unicorn. But how do we create a compelling vision? So 30% top line growth, 30% or more profitability, to really create a financial fortress, to reinvest in growth, to do whatever you want, with that money in abundance, and 30% open time for the founder. So that's, what we've really been working on, and just continuing to do that with an extraordinary team of coaches and visionaries and leaders, in SafiMedia.
It's interesting. And I love that there's that 30% time for the founder, because that is so key.
Right.
When we started working together, and I was in like a medical clinic model, right? And that model, the way it is, it's not sustainable unless you want to like overwork and sacrifice and just be doing, which then you don't have time to see the big vision. You're so stuck in the one foot in front of the other. You don't have time, energy to think bigger, rest at all. You're just busy putting out fires all day long. And in a part of our work together, creating the Pleasure Collective, like I designed that business with the end in mind, right? Not because, there's this current model that exists and everyone does it this way, so I'm going to build it this way.
Yeah. Right. And because that's working out so well for the planet.
Exactly. And then and I think COVID has changed a lot with like our perception, and it gave people the opportunity to slow down and assess. And for me, a lot of that was, like there's this excess here, and me trying to prove myself here. And what would my days look like? What would my life look like? What's the impact that I want to have? And do I want this badge of honor for working 12, 14-hour days, 6 days a week? I don't.
I think agreed. And I think like we've been raised in this culture that continues to be a patriarchal culture, and in a patriarchal culture, a woman has to earn her spot. I can remember growing up, and when I was like a high performer kid. I was, maybe you were also, I think you're probably
speaking to the right
right?
Crowd,
exactly. Yeah. Right. Like a lot of the women listening. So, I would, if there was a race, I wanted to win it. If there was a test, I wanted to ace it. And I just kind of wanted to. And I also have so many memories of I would like to go to a cross country race and I'd finish it and maybe I won. And then my dad would be like, did you beat the boys? And it was like this kind of thing, like a victory wasn't a victory. Like you had to just turn it up, big time. And I think we carry that, and it turns into perfectionism, which is anchored and is a freaking cancer in a woman's ability to truly create and drive change. Perfectionism, striving, and it's so baked in. The other morning I get up and, my clock, sort of my watch has this little alarm. I open my eyes and I start to do my thing where I just kind of think about the day. And I asked myself, what do I want out of this day? And the first word that comes up is, I want it to be productive. And I could then immediately, that's followed by this vice like around my neck, like it feels, you can just feel productive, and then the pressure. And so even like for all the work that I've done, and I've made big changes, in terms of how I show up and how I think about things. But yeah, like that desire to be productive is another form of perfectionism. Yeah. It's brutal.
Yeah. And that would definitely be our entire audience.
Yeah.
and speaking more to how that perfectionism, like how it shows up at work, and oftentimes we're getting rewarded at work, but then it's creating problems in our relationships. So,
Yeah.
but it's the same. It's the same thinking and that energy that if we bring that perfectionism to a romantic partnership, to intimacy, it has to erode it.
Yes.
So tell us more. Tell us about like how you're thinking differently, what you're doing differently, because I think it's really, really cool.
Well, and it's interesting. Like I remember when you have never wavered ever in all the years I've known you ever from the primacy of pleasure. Y'all, like, like ever.
And I knew it, but I mean, at first I was a little scared to say it, and you helped me with that.
Yes, but it was always this, you always knew it, you always knew it. It was always this thing, like, I need to be able to, we need to have these conversations. I need to be doing this work in this area in order to do this. And, you have been that place. So I really, it was you and a few others who I had started to hear about this conversation that was in the air about the well-being of women and its connection to pleasure. And I was like, okay, so it's all about having great sex then. Okay. Like very literal. I was
so
extremely
what perfectionist checklist do I need to have great sex?
Exactly. Like, right. It was all about that. That's sort of how I processed it, which is so interesting, like you can, your message lands in people in waves. And so I remember that happening, and that was just kind of interesting. And then, and I thought about it, but I was still so very much anchored in productiveness, and proving it. And then I really, it's interesting. I got to this place in my life and my business where I'd accomplished a lot of the big goals that I wanted to accomplish. And I started to feel all of my ambition draining out like the tide. And I have experienced this before. I actually experienced it when I actually moved into the field of women's leadership. That was kind of the call. So the signal, it's very terrifying for a perfectionist and a striver to not feel ambition. But it's like, there has to be this space. You can't, if all of your soul is tied up in the things that you want to prove and perfect and please, you have to make space. So I could feel that happening, especially around the beginning of COVID. And COVID was so powerful for women, right? It was incredibly hard for so many women around the world. And it was also a powerful experience for many women. So I started to kind of feel the tide of my ambition going out. And that was, really interesting. And I started to, shift. So shifts started to happen. And I was like, this is so interesting. Like, so much of growth and striving is driven by scarcity, by not enough. There's not enough. You're not enough. What happens if I just, and then everybody talks about how important abundance is. But moving from scarcity to the opposite of scarcity is not abundance. The opposite of scarcity is sufficiency. It's just that there's enough. And I started operating from this place. And from that place, I found that what I really wanted in my life wasn't more, but it was actually a sense of wholeness. It was this ability to really bring together these parts of myself, because even in perfection, even when it's rewarded at work, you're rewarded for being a shell of yourself. You're rewarded for bringing only the parts of you that are perfect and for leaving behind everything else. And we wonder why we're fucking depressed. We wonder why women are on so many antidepressants, on so many, like, they accomplish all these things, they're still not happy. And I know you've been talking about this for a long time. Like, that's Pink Canary. Hello. But
if you haven't read it.
Exactly. Right. But it's like, and I remember reading it, and still we all have to have our own awakening around it, and so that's right. And so that's when I started really shifting things to be about wholeness. And so for me, like, wholeness is, how do I create space in my life for all of me to be there? And it sounds, well, not the people listening to this podcast. On my podcast, sometimes I'll talk about it and I'm going to be like, I know 15% of you understand what I'm talking about. And the other 85 are like, she's in Canada. Like, what did she just smoke? But on this podcast, I bet people
now we're
are like,
it's 15% that don't get it.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's in what you're describing. And I think even for me, it was a journey of getting there. I was like, there's this thing, it's missing, but that wholeness, fullness is the essence of feminine energy. And it's not a concept that is ingrained in us when we are trying to get the good grades and win the races and, always do better. No one's ever like, hey, exactly how you are in this moment, everything about you, everything about the performance you just did was perfect. Great job. And I'm not talking about, we could get into a massive conversation about like rewarding mediocrity and erosion of
standards.
That's
right. Yeah.
But just as you are is okay. And it is, and not only is okay, it's enough. Mm-hmm. And that performance that you did was enough. You got fifth. It wasn't your best time, but today it was what it was meant to be.
Yeah.
And when we're always feeling like we have to show parts and not our whole selves, it's this incongruence that makes us sick.
Totally. And it's so interesting because I think there's so much in society too that actively discourages women from taking time for themselves. But, I did this experiment and I had been feeling kind of tired, but I was getting lots of sleep. So, it was this, and, I had my checkups, I'm good, but really it was like the kind of fatigue that comes from being out of balance. Mm. And so and it wasn't something that I could cure with a vacation, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And so I decided to run this experiment where I took my prime production hours, which for me are like 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And that's typically where I produce stuff that I need to produce. If I want to produce something, I'm going to produce it. And I returned those hours back to myself. And they were really dedicated to my creativity. So some mornings I'll go to the botanical gardens. Some mornings I'll just go and buy flowers and arrange them. Some mornings I will write. It's time for me. And what was so interesting is that opened up space in my morning. So I wasn't trying to cram it into a morning routine. And so I started doing yoga in the mornings, and it created this subtle thing, but it was a big shift when you decide to truly prioritize yourself and your well-being, not in order to be more productive, but in order to be a whole person. Right. And that's it. That's the only reason.
That's exactly it. And when you are a perfectionist, it's generally what I see, doing those, taking the time to do yoga or the morning routine because one, you think you have to, or you need it to kind of keep your sanity, or as a I've earned it, I've earned my vacation.
Yeah.
But when we see it as just because I want to, and I enjoy being me, and then the shifts that can come from that is amazing in business, in the way you think, in the way you can show up in your relationships, your health. I see it all the time.
I can imagine, and it's this radical thing really for a woman to value herself enough that she doesn't need to justify it because she's going to be a more productive contributor of society. It's just because she values herself. And it's where, you start to see the truth behind this expression that comes from, it's like, it comes from this First Nations culture here in Canada, that how we treat the planet is how we treat our women. And this woman speaker shared this with me one time, and I was like, oh my gosh, and a lot of times, like if I loop back to this mission that I have around advancing a model of economic growth that nourishes the planet, one woman-owned business at a time, a lot of times it's not, everybody's going to do it differently, but a lot of times it's not about what's the strategy. A lot of times it's actually about how is she taking care of herself and prioritizing herself? I'll give you a quick example. Without, the more I take the time to be with myself, the more grounded I am, the more aware and present I am, the less I feel this sort of absent-minded need to numb out, whether it's with having a glass of wine or retail therapy, none of which are bad, by the way, but it's like how we use them. And so often we use mindless consumption of something, to make up for the separation that we have from ourselves, this lack of wholeness. And that continues to drive like a model of growth that is by nature and definition unsustainable. So, I really think, what you and so many people are onto, and what people like me start to not teach, but live, try to live, I think has huge impacts for future generations, for the planet. And we don't have to do any of those things because of that. It's just it's a natural byproduct. It just is.
And we will heal things for future generations because it is. And that's just because of the fullness, and because it would just get more and more full and easier. And I just feel like the more women that kind of become awake to all of it, to go, oh wow, like I gotta fix I gotta fix me first, or I built this massive unsustainable business and now my marriage is in shambles because I have been overworking, looking for my validation, checking all the boxes here in this area, and like dropped a ball, lost sight, or don't even know how to be cared for, ask for help, have fun. Like we just forget who we are.
Yeah.
Because we're not rewarded, or we don't think that there is reward in the being or the becoming a different way. But then once you see it or get a taste of it, and then it's like, oh, like, why did I not do this before? Why did I not go pick flowers, like go get a bouquet of flowers and arrange them years ago? Why were my mornings not always like this?
Yeah. And the problem too, right, is what happens is that you start to starve yourself out of these pleasurable experiences. So I'll give you an example. Like when you start to prioritize, like what I have noticed, again, this is my experience, my lived experience, my journey. So like I have noticed from really taking the time to devote the best hours of my day to myself, to return them back to myself, doing whatever the F I want, not feeling like I have to use it for this project or that project. All of a sudden I start to become aware of things that I want. And so, for example, this weekend, I was like, okay, you know what? I really want to have some experiences. And these are the experiences that I want. And so I basically took a half a day to planning out these really amazing experiences for myself and my family in the summer. Everything, I thought through what I wanted. I bought the tickets. I got the hotels. I, just kind of mapped out all of these incredible experiences, and they're mapped out. I can see them. I can look forward to them versus, oh my God, we got to plan this family vacation. Wait, and like, where are we going to stay
last
again?
minute,
It's like all of a sudden I'm
hotel
stressed.
book,
it's a pain.
You get a flat tire.
Right. Like so, like cramming the parts of your life that are so enjoyable into these little tiny corners and yet devoting hours to some elaborate strategic plan that nobody's going to follow anyway, in your business, right? Like, where is the logic in that? And yeah,
that's exhausting. And the desires with the family, and that's just, it gives you energy to do it.
Right?
Motivation. Yeah. It propels you forward because you desired it. You enjoyed the planning process. You're going to enjoy doing it, seeing it happen.
Yeah.
And then, because, and there's some part of your soul that dies, I think, when you do the strategic plan and you put your heart and soul into it, and it's brilliant, and it just doesn't get executed. Like, that's exhausting. That's burnout totally material.
Exhausting. Exactly.
So tell me, what brings you pleasure aside from your giving the best hours of your day back to yourself?
Yeah. Oh my God. So many things, like having, filling my home with bouquets of really beautiful flowers, having sex with my husband, really choosing like really fun, like planning out really amazing dining experiences,
love
huge. Drawing, actually, like drawing and sketching bring me huge pleasure. Hiking, having a cup of coffee on my couch in my beautiful living room, just sort of sitting quietly and enjoying having space. Those are all things that bring me pleasure. Silk pajamas are huge. Really good products, really good hair and face products. Taking elaborate care of my curls using all of the curly girl methodologies, as you would well know.
Yes, I do.
Like using the praying hands method. Come on. Just like there's so much. But, also like taking time to plan out like the whole experience, like it's not just the experiences, but actually taking time to plan them out, taking time to anticipate them, taking time to reflect and enjoy, them even after the fact. Like these things, it's really the ability to have a present, luxurious, slow life. Yeah.
And it sounds so delicious to me. Right? And I know it sounds like this elusive foreign concept to a lot of our listeners. And we teach space, and this has come up a lot, and I'm happy it did, because I teach space in the feminine mentorship as like, it's a month of us going through, how do we create it? How do we create it in our homes?
Yeah.
In our calendars, how we spend our time, just even like mental space.
Yeah.
And it's so foreign to us with how we're taught to, get more done, be productive, all those things. So, and in the shifts that can happen is one of the first things that I teach, because the shifts that can happen when we do it, and what we can see and what's available to us is like, it never would have been if you're doing the last minute planning of the family trip, or prioritizing the work stuff over yourself. And the part that I love, but it's also the scary part, is that so many women don't get it, or they don't know like how do I want this, but how do I get from here to here? And it is that piece of, I want a life that supports all of me, and reflects all of me in my fullness, when I'm not shrinking.
Yeah. And that's, exactly, like, it's so interesting, so much of culture is about shrinking down women. Like, we have to shrink our size, we have to shrink our voices, we have to just shrink and be small and deny ourselves the space. But, it's, when I was, a really seminal book in my development was Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. And she talked about in order to write, a woman needs money and a room of her own, like a room where she can go in and shut the door, i.e. space. So this idea of space has been so deeply connected to women's empowerment. I don't know if that's the right word, but just women's wholeness, I guess, for such a long time. And people talk about it, but they don't, to your point, like it's until you understand how important it is, it's like this, it's like a whole new world of possibility when you put the space first, because what we're taught to do is to add it to the list. We're not taught space, we're taught lists, so add it to the list, but there's no space to do it. So yet another impossible standard that we can't possibly accomplish, so, oh my God, that makes so much sense to me.
And personally right now, having just moved 2 weeks ago and trying to unpack, and our house wasn't ready. So we were bouncing back and forth with Airbnbs, moved back in with my parents for a week. Like it was
fun.
My space, like to have my office half unpacked, half like to not have the room of my own. Cause I know like when I walk in and shut the door and it's just like, okay, this is how I want to feel in here. This is like my space to create whatever, but to have it off, it's almost like indescribable, like almost a little intangible. Like you have to feel it. If you have space and oh, okay, this is what it feels like to have, this pillow, this decorative pillow right here, just because I want it, just because it feels good to me, and then when you look at that pillow, you're like, amazing.
Yeah.
And we're so used to having our space infringed on.
Yeah.
Like some
totally.
kids' shoes end up in here or whatever.
Exactly. Or like,
right. And then
baseball mitt, like get that shit out of here.
Get it out of my
Get it out of here.
Mom's space. And again, we can't even really describe why it's wrong, and nor should we have to. It's just like, because I want it that way.
Yeah. Exactly.
Tell us, what obstacle or obstacles have you had to overcome to find your strength and really step into your power?
Wow. I mean, I feel sometimes I feel like what haven't I had to overcome? So many. I mean, like I definitely grew up in a degree of privilege. My dad was an economics professor. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. We always had enough to eat. We always, like we were well cared for. But I'm a biracial woman growing up in a small town, and it definitely experienced that splintering, where I am half Black, half white, which in our culture means I'm Black, and I can remember, growing up and even between like the natural sort of that feeling of splintering as a woman growing or being born a girl, also feeling, because of my ethnic heritage and racial reality, that splintered as well, because I could kind of pass, quote unquote, I could pass for white. So I always felt like I was sort of going over onto my dad's side and denying the parts of me that were my mom's. And so I really grew up denying a lot of what was feminine because it didn't feel safe to acknowledge it. So the impact that has can be like that, continue to fuel perfectionism and proving and performing and just not bringing wholeness. So I think, almost every obstacle that I've experienced roots and anchors back to that feeling that happens for so many of us as women, that we can't bring the fullness of who we are. That's not acceptable or appropriate or desired or rewarded. We can only bring the parts of us that are perfect. And and I think that has truly like driven most of the challenges, that I've had in my life. where, like many listeners, who listens to podcasts? Women who want to continue elevating and growing. And so we want to continue elevating and growing. So we develop all these fantastic skills, like fierce skills. But, as I've become an adult and developed as a woman, it was never about if I had the skills. It was, did I have the wholeness to truly embody and live what the types of opportunities that my skills allowed me to open up? Some people call that imposter syndrome, but I call that wholeness. It's not something, right, I need to cure through limiting thoughts, because I think a whole thing around limiting thoughts is also like telling yourself to shut up. Like that's my problem with a lot of, even in the coaching world, which is based around Rene Descartes, the male philosopher, I think, therefore I am, that it's anchored in thoughts and thought work, which are not, they are part of the picture, but not that is not wholeness, so.
Yeah. So many women, especially if we're like perimenopausal or we're burnt out and not sleeping, our thoughts can be a scary place sometimes. Like we don't want to be like, I think therefore I am when I'm, spiraling, burnt out, menopausal.
Exactly.
No.
Exactly.
That doesn't work.
Exactly.
And instead, if it's a constant turning back to who we are, to our wholeness, and not looking for those check boxes or the lists or of how to do it. Because I'll say, like, we need space, and they'll be like, okay, so how do we do space? And give me the steps. Yeah. And it's like, well, no, this is going to look different for you, and you're going to have to try on a few ways. And you even mentioned like your 9 to 11 evolved.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
Like what you did and what feels good, and as it should. We're like cyclical beings.
Absolutely.
We create life. Like there needs to be ebbs and flows and things. So like the sex you were having 10 years ago
exactly
might not be good for you today. It probably shouldn't still be good for you today, because you're not that person anymore. And same with like, if yoga or soul cycle was your thing for the last 5 years, but it's not doing it for you, like we gotta evolve and do it based on like what our heart, our soul wants.
Yeah. And having the space to know what that even is,
to even figure it out.
Yeah. Right. Like that's because there's so many messages for so long saying, don't listen to yourself, don't trust yourself, override that instinct. Yeah. And
I used to get slapped for that all the time as an intern with the patients and stuff. It was like, well, why did you choose that treatment? It's third line treatment. Like, why didn't you do what's first line? And I could tell them what first line treatment was, but I was like, I just knew that this was the better option. Yeah. And that in school made me not good. X, not following protocol.
That's right. Exactly.
But then in real life as a clinician, it made me crush it because I listened to my inner voice. Yeah. And you definitely need the space to do so.
Absolutely.
All right. Last question. Although I don't want this conversation to end. Share a brag with us.
Oh my God. Oh my Lorsh. It's so interesting. Like, what I was about to say? What I was about to say was, honestly, Jordin, there's so many.
That we want that. I'll have what she's having is what this is called. So I love starting my calls with women, like, give me the brags. And they're like, wait a second, let me get out my list. There was
I know, exactly. Like, there's so many too.
Yeah, you could even rapid fire them. Give me 5.
It's so, So honestly, So there are tons of brags that I can share around, checking lists. But what I will, the thing that I think, is sort of the biggest brag is that I am a woman who can say what I want to say in any circumstance, no matter what. And that is hard to do. Like if somebody isn't, performing and meeting my expectation, we just talked about not performing. But if I have an expectation, for instance, in my business, and there's a role and there's certain things that have to happen, I have no problem having difficult conversations. I don't wait. I don't drag my feet around it. I say it. Nobody ever is going to wonder what I'm thinking, ever. And I don't know many women who can do that. I don't know many people who can do that, and the other part too is like, I truly am open and transparent and do not feel like I have to be perfect in order to be worthy. I don't even pretend. I don't even bother pretending. Like there's no part of me that feels, or in cases where I have been less than perfect, feel like I have to explain it. And again, I think that's a huge brag, because when you live that way, you're totally free.
So free. That was the word that came to me when you were speaking. I was like, that's freedom.
Right. And that to me, like, that's the most meaningful brag I feel like I could share. Here, go read my bio. It's all online, ladies. There's a lot of other stuff. Go check it out. But, but that to me is like, that's what I think, is just a big brag, and I feel really proud of. Yeah.
Love it. And it is the absolute perfect brag to share. So Eleanor, thank you so much for having this conversation with us. Where, for everyone that wants to find out more, where can they find you?
Oh, I love it. So you can go check out the Power Presence Position podcast. You can go to eleanorbeaton.com, or maybe Instagram, Eleanor Beaton.
Her podcast is amazing. So definitely recommend checking
Jordin's been
out.
A guest. Yes. Yes.
Oh, thank you. It was amazing.
It was so good to see you.
Have a great week, everybody.
If you like what you heard in this episode, leave me a rating. Your support helps me get discovered by more women like you. Together, we can change the conversation around women's sexual health and pleasure for you, your partners, and generations to come.